Trump's been elected twice. After he was elected the first time, he lost his reelection, threw a temper tantrum, and then sicked a mob of violent superfans on the Capitol, where they attacked police officers, menaced Mitt Romney, our man, and other politicians. And yet somehow he came back, got elected the president.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I have stumbled across this video, and let me tell you, it is wild. Kara Swisher sits down with CNN conservative pundit Scott Jennings, someone who used to be vocally anti-Trump, but has now become one of his biggest defenders. And what happens is his former colleague, Tim Miller, absolutely confronts him about this transformation, basically asking how 2015 Scott would feel about 2025 Scott defending things he used to find unconscionable. The tension is real, and Scott's answers are honestly kind of shocking. So make sure you watch until the end, because you need to see how he tries to justify all of this. Please comment down below where you are watching from. I really love to see people from all over the world connecting in here. All right, now let us get into the video.
Much better. And I think the American people would have approved of it if more communication efforts had been made, not just directly, but also with the Congress.
So the PR of it, I'm always like wary when someone says the PR was right. It's often when Uber was
well, you have to communicate with your constituents about what you're doing.
Sure,
but to me, it makes sense to do that.
The way it was done, the execution might be the thing you might want to focus in on here. Speaking of Doge, you write about it in the book. So the reality is that Congress doesn't even know how much of the budget has been spent because of Elon Musk and the Doge slash and burn. In your book, you called what Elon did with Doge extraordinary. I think that's not what most people think, including Trump people I talk to. Something else stood out. You wrote about the U.S. Digital Service. You wrote, crucially, the office was able to reach every layer of the federal government. It was exactly what Elon Musk had in mind when he mused about having access to the government's servers. I'm curious, as a conservative, because I'm not a conservative, but I'm certainly concerned that Elon has access to a trove of government data, of America's information, especially with AI models that consolidate that information. That sounds like Big Brother's not limited government that conservatives want.
Well, I think that if you were going to start to examine how we're spending money and where it goes within our vast bureaucracy, you have to have access to the systems that would tell you where it's going. I don't have any reason to believe Elon had any nefarious purposes whatsoever, other than to tell you what he told me when I interviewed him. I said, "Why are you here?" And he said, "I'm trying to find a way to make America not go bankrupt." And he was sincere in that. He had strong feelings about a lot of other issues, but that was the first thing that he told me when we sat down. And so I interpreted all of his moves as this: I've been given a mandate by the president to find wasteful spending and to cut it. And I want to move fast, and I may need to break some things along the way, but how do I actually get access to the information that I need to find the things to cut? I mean, they did it. And in some cases it was successful, and in some cases they ran into roadblocks, but I think they were feeling pressure to move quickly. And, Elon told me, he believes our fiscal situation is dire. He thinks the amount of debt in the country is devaluing the currency.
That's where he broke with Trump.
He believes that that combined with the mass migration crisis and the low birth rate is sort of all these things are aligning to really threaten the future of the country. And he was very sincere about that when I spoke with him about it.
I don't believe everything comes out of his mouth that you might, given I've known him for 30 years and was a fan and no longer. When you look at Doge, because you talk about it a lot in the book, you consider it successful?
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I think the impulse to cut wasteful
spending... Which is not a new impulse, Scott. Cutting spending. The Bush administration had one. The Clinton, every administration has one of these things.
And then, look, I wrote about this as well. When you look at what the president laid out in his speech to Congress in March, going through that line item of all the sort of ridiculous things, I think those are the nagging things that drive people crazy, and no one ever seems to do anything about it. So, yes, I liked it very much. As I said, though, I think the future of this is you have to have more cooperation with the Congress, because ultimately they are going to have to be the ones to decide to spend less and enforce less spending and enforce less ridiculous spending on the executive branch. So that to me is what's missing right now, is the evolution where we're working with Congress to make.
Look, I need you to understand something right now. When someone tells you they had to access every layer of the federal government, every server, every system, every piece of data on American citizens, and their justification is that they are trying to save America from bankruptcy, that should terrify you. That is not limited government. That is not conservative principles. That is consolidation of power in the hands of one unelected billionaire. And here is what gets me. Scott sits there defending this like it is the most reasonable thing in the world. Oh, he was sincere when he told me he wants to save America. He was sincere. You know who else was sincere? Every single person who has ever grabbed power in the name of saving something. Sincerity is not a defense. Sincerity does not make it okay for one person to have access to the personal data of hundreds of millions of Americans. Let me give you some historical context here because I think this matters. Throughout history, whenever governments have consolidated financial and data control under emergency pretenses, it has never ended well for regular people. The East India Company was sincere about bringing order to trade. Sincere does not equal safe. And Kara makes such an important point here. She says she has known this guy for 30 years, was a fan, and is no longer. That is not partisan bias. That is someone who watched a transformation happen and is sounding the alarm. When people who know someone start warning you about them, maybe we should listen. The fiscal situation is dire, they say. The debt is devaluing the currency, they say. You know what is also dire? One person having the keys to everything, while Congress does not even know how much has been spent. That is not saving America. That is something else entirely.
Make it stick and make it, frankly, more expansive over time.
So are you actually pushing for a stronger Congress in the face of executive authority?
Oh, look, I think it would be great if Congress would take up their responsibilities to exercise a little more fiscal responsibility in this country. I think most Republicans believe that.
And how do you think they're doing right now?
I think some things are good. I like it that they executed the biggest welfare reform in a generation in the big, beautiful bill. I think that is good. But I think the enduring question and the most important question is, we're spending 54% more money today than we were just before COVID. Do you feel like your government is 54% better today than it was just before COVID? I don't. And we have, trillions upon trillions upon trillions in debt. I think Elon's alarm that he raised to me is quite real. And I think that sentiment is held by a lot of people. And so eventually we're going to have to reckon with this, and we haven't done it in a serious way yet.
When you get to the idea of Congress having more power, do you think this Congress, which is in lockstep with Trump, is a good idea? And people pushing back like Marjorie Greene should be welcome, presumably, right? Correct?
Well, look, I think that the Congress is largely in step with Trump on his policy priorities. And it's because when he ran for president, they were all running at the same time and they all basically ran on the same platform. They didn't run their campaigns to say, well, I know you love Trump, but I'm going to go up there and oppose him, even though I'm also a Republican. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. And so I think they've done what their voters expected them to do, help the president execute. I think the long-term fiscal health of the country, though, is troubling, and it needs to be dealt with. And it look, 70-something% of our budget is non-discretionary. And so, we are going to have to reckon with some long-term structural issues if we're going to get the fiscal health of the country in order. And that has not been dealt with yet, but it will have to be someday.
Every episode, we get a question from an outside expert. Here's yours.
Hey, Scott, it's your old buddy Tim Miller with the Bulwark Podcast. When I was asked to submit this question, I just thought about what a long, strange trip it's been since we worked together for Jeb Bush back in 2015. And that made me just think of this little thought exercise. I wonder what you think would have happened if I went in a time machine from today back to our old office there in Miami in 2015, and I said to you, guess what? You won't believe this. Donald Trump's been elected twice. After he was elected the first time, he lost his reelection, threw a temper tantrum, and then sicked a mob of violent superfans on the Capitol where they attacked police officers, menaced Mitt Romney, our man, and other politicians. And yet somehow he came back, got elected to the presidency again, and then instituted an insane Smoot-Hawley-style non-conservative tariff regime, trampled all over the rule of law. One example, sending Venezuelans to a foreign prison camp to be tortured with no due process, just based on their tattoos. And that after all of that happened, you, Scott, my Jeb colleague, would be for him. Not only for him, enthusiastically for him, simping for him on a podcast. And I think if I told 2015 Scott that, you would say, that's crazy, Tim. There's no way that could have happened, but B, there's no way I'd be for it. But here you are, you're for it. And so I wonder, does that make you think that 2015 Scott was wrong about something? Or does that make you think maybe some of the people that you thought had TDS when they talked about all the crazy stuff Trump would do had a point? Let me know what you think.
All right, 2015 Scott. Don't worry, I sick difficult questions on everybody. So.
This right here is where everything falls apart for Scott, because his entire defense has been built on this idea that cutting spending is good, that someone needed to shake things up, that the impulse was correct even if the execution was messy. And then Tim Miller comes in and just levels him. And I want you to really hear what Tim is describing here. He is not making things up. He is listing actual things that have happened. An insane tariff regime that contradicts decades of conservative economic policy, rule of law being trampled, people being sent to foreign prison camps based on tattoos, no due process, no trial, just tattoos. Let that sink in for a second. We have reached the point in American politics where a mainstream conservative pundit is being asked to defend sending people to be tortured in foreign prisons, and his response is essentially going to be, well, the future of the West is at stake. Here's what I need you to understand about the 70% non-discretionary budget number that Scott throws out. Yes, most of our budget goes to things like Social Security and Medicare. You know why? Because Americans paid into those programs their entire working lives. That is not waste. That is a promise. Framing it as non-discretionary, like it is some bureaucratic bloat, is dishonest. Those are earned benefits. And the transformation we are watching in real time with people like Scott, this is what happens when party loyalty becomes more important than principle. Tim literally worked with this man. They were colleagues, fighting for the same things. Now, one of them is defending things he would have found unconscionable just a few years ago.
I thought you were going to get a question from an expert, but you got Tim Miller instead. So when you get the expert
it's
question, let me know.
Entertainment, Scott. Entertainment. Bring the people entertained. Are you not entertained?
He's neither expert nor entertaining, I can assure you.
Okay.
Look, here's what I think. 2015 Scott would have been totally shocked to have learned early on anyway that Donald Trump was going to get elected twice. I will tell you a quick story that I tell in my book. And, you know, the first person to ever tell me Trump was going to be the next president was my dad, a garbage man and a factory worker from Kentucky who was the biggest Clinton Democrat that I knew. And of course, I told him he was full of shit. And you know, you don't know what you're talking about. And he was right and I was wrong. And so I think a lot of people who had been trained in normal politics didn't take it seriously at first. I learned very quickly during that primary, not only should it be taken seriously, but that it was quite likely to happen. I did campaign in 2016 for Jeb early on, and I was out on the road and I was running into people thinking, he's got something going on here. And that's when I realized there was a big change coming to the Republican Party. So I think in many ways, Donald Trump has executed like any Republican would. Taxes are low. The Supreme Court is conservative. You know, these are basic Republican things. The number one departure on policy orthodoxy has been tariffs. No question about it. It's not been a tariff party. You know, Bush did a little tariffs briefly. Reagan did a little briefly, but we've not been a tariff party. But interestingly, it is I think, and I don't know what you think, but it's the longest held view of Trump. It's his most closely held view.
I think it's his view. I think it's idiotic, but go ahead.
But it's his most consistent view, and he has never, ever shied away from it. And yet he did win 2 elections on it, and he did implement it. I personally think the Supreme Court may take away some of his power here based on what I heard in the arguments. But I guess what I would say is that every president puts their own policy and primatur on their own party. Bush did a few things that weren't particularly conservative either. But what I have come to believe is that we're not just arguing about the daily politics anymore. I do believe the future of the West is at stake. And whether Trump knew he was signing up for it or not, I believe he believes in the future of the West, and I think he's fighting forces that don't. And so I guess I sobered up a little bit about what's really at stake in this world. And it's not just daily policy fights, but it's about ideologies, and it's about whether we're going to have an American future or something much darker.
That's the dark idea of it. But Tara, you write as if tariffs were a flex. I don't think most people think tariffs are a flex. Most conservatives in the old school, and 2015 Scott certainly wouldn't have thought it was a flex.
No, Republicans for my whole career did not believe in tariffs. We were not a tariff party. Some of our presidents had dalliances with it, but they didn't believe in it the way Trump did. And so there's no question and no quibble for me that this is, in my opinion, the biggest policy departure from the traditional conservative or Republican movement.
But you support it.
Do I support it? Look, I think he won the election on it, and he's our president, and he's allowed to operate.
Okay, but do you agree with it, Scott Jennings?
I think some of it is working already. I think some of it is TBD, and I think I would probably rethink.
Oh no! The moment Tim says there is no way 2015 Scott would be for this, and then hits him with, "But here you are," that is the mask coming completely off, because Scott cannot deny it. He knows his former self would be horrified. He knows it, and Tim knows it, and everyone watching knows it. And what is Scott's defense? What is his big justification for abandoning everything he used to believe? His dad, a garbage man from Kentucky, predicted this political rise. That is his answer. That is supposed to explain why he is now defending torture camps and insane economic policy? Because his dad called it early? That is not a defense. That is an origin story for a heel turn. But here is what really gets me. Scott says he believes the future of the West is at stake. He believes there are forces fighting against an American future, pushing towards something much darker. And I actually want to take that seriously for a second, because I think it reveals everything. What are these dark forces he is talking about? What is this existential threat that justifies abandoning rule of law, supporting concentration of power, defending the indefensible? He never says. It is always vague. It is always ominous. It is always just enough to justify whatever comes next. This is the playbook throughout history. Create an existential enemy. Make it vague enough that it can be anyone. Use that fear to justify consolidating power. And the people defending it always think they are the good guys. They always think the ends justify the means. The saddest part of this whole exchange is watching someone who clearly knows better make the choice to go along anyway. Tim gave him an out. He gave him a chance to reflect, to acknowledge the transformation, to grapple with it honestly. And instead, Scott retreats to these vague, apocalyptic justifications that do not hold up to any scrutiny. You want to know what the real threat to the future of the West is? It is when smart people convince themselves that principles do not matter anymore because the stakes are too high. It is when, here you are for, it becomes acceptable because the alternative is admitting you were wrong. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.